we're here to celebrate the Air Force's 75th birthday, which was, I think, on Sunday. But we're going to celebrate it the whole year, really. So today we're going to do a couple things, but our first special guest is Mr. Donald Koser. He's our friend out at Global Strike Command, and he's going to give a terrific history lecture today on Strategic Air Command. So I'll introduce Don. Don is the director of the Air Force Global Strike Command History and Heritage Program. Manages 11 history and 9 heritage programs across the command. Don serves 27 years in the Air Force, including 2 assignments and 3 deployments as a wing historian. He joined the Global Strike Command History Program as a civilian in 2012 and was named director in 2018. Don is married with 7 children and 8 granddaughters. And so he's starting his own nation, apparently. So, Don, we appreciate you sharing your valuable time here on a Saturday, and the floor is over to you.
Well, you're welcome. And you heard it right. That was 8 granddaughters. We've had 8 grandchildren, all granddaughters. So it's an awesome thing. But I want to thank Dr. Ali for setting this up, giving me an opportunity to speak during the year, as you mentioned, of the 75th anniversary of the Air Force celebration. So I appreciate that. Our SAC, Strategic Air Command, is a bit older. If you look at its lineage, it predates the Air Force by about a year and a half, being activated in March of 1946. So SAC, active for 45 years during the height of the Cold War, served as the deterrent that the country needed. And then it was inactivated on 1 June of 1992. And 17 years later, on 7 August 2009, SAC is activated once again, and it's redesignated as Air Force Global Strike Command. So I guess that's why I was asked to talk about SAC today, with that lineal connection. Once again, I'm thankful for the opportunity to talk to you today. It's going to be kind of a wave top brief. Somebody once said the best briefings are brief, so I won't hold you too long. I do hope that you hear or learn something new, or at least perhaps maybe you hear something that you hadn't considered for some time. So with that, if you're all ready, I guess we could get started.
All right.
World War II officially ended on the deck of the USS Missouri, and that was in September of 1945. 2 men that are on that deck would become SAC commanders in the future, and those 2 men, of course, are General George Kenney and General Curtis Lemay. The U.S. was in a good position at this time strategically. We were the only country with nuclear or atomic weapons, as they were called back then. In March of 1946, still under the Army Air Force is restructured under 3 major commands. Those are Strategic Air Command, Tactical Air Command, and Air Defense Command. So SAC's initial mission, and you can see it there if you have the screen, conduct long-range offensive operations in any part of the world, either independently or in cooperation with land and naval forces. And I can tell you, frankly, that mission statement is pretty relevant even today to what Global Strike is tasked to do. Well, a few months later in 1946, in July, a SAC B-29 crew under Operation Crossroads drops an atomic bomb in the Bikini Atoll. And the purpose of this is to test its effect on naval vessels. So this is a successful mission. The crew in Dave's Dream in the B-29 successfully dropped the weapon. The results are what they were. But for the Air Force, it was the first publicly announced and press reported atomic test at the time. So it was probably a good venue to let our enemies know at the time that we still had the capability. So SAC is definitely off to a good start. If you're curious, the test had about 73 naval vehicles of various sizes. And out of those 73, there were 5 sunk and 9 badly damaged. If you could go to the next slide, please. Well, in charge of SAC at the time is General George Kenney. And what's not to like about General Kenney? He's an innovator. He's a master aviator. He's well respected by his peers. And he was loved by his men in Far East Air Forces during World War II. Well, he enlisted as a flying cadet back in 1917. During World War I, he shot down 2 enemy aircraft as a young lieutenant. He later served as assistant attaché for air in Paris. And during that time, he made a lot of recommendations that were brought back to the U.S. and used to make improvements in U.S. aircraft leading up to World War II. As the commander of Allied Air Force's Southwest Pacific area under MacArthur, Kenney is credited with turning that unit around and successfully executing the air war in the Pacific. And some would even say he did it with string and bubble gum. So not a lot of equipment and the things that they felt they needed were provided. So if you look at this, Kenney seems like the perfect fit to be the initial commander of Strategic Air Command. And there were some early successes. I mentioned the Operation Crossroads, which went off, I believe it went off without a hitch, with Dave's Dream, the crew of Dave's Dream delivering that. And I mentioned that it was open to the public and the press. So again, this was just a bonanza for public relations wise for Strategic Air Command. And then the B-36 Peacemaker I'm sorry, if you go to the next screen. You've got the B-36 Peacemaker, a true long-range bomber, became operational during this time as well. You may recognize that as the aircraft known for its 6 turning and 4 burning engines. Very unique. I also have a model of it over my shoulder if you can see it. One of my favorite Air Force aircraft, actually. So there were some early successes, as I mentioned. However, after about a year as the commander, there were rumblings that things weren't going well in SAC. If you remember, the Berlin blockade happens, and during that time, the Joint Chiefs of Staff call Kenney to the Pentagon, and they're asking for a brief of the status of Strategic Air Command at the time. Well, after that briefing, some questioned if Kenney really had his finger on the pulse of his unit afterwards. And of course, the Air Force Chief of Staff would have been there, General Hoyt Vandenberg. So he was concerned enough that he asked a good friend of his, Charles Lindbergh, to review the combat readiness of the SAC strategic squadrons. Lindbergh agreed to do this. This was not going to be a quick, shallow review of any kind. This was going to be an in-depth review, and it was. He spent several months visiting 6 SAC bases. He spoke directly with airmen and personnel. He flew nearly 100 hours in SAC aircraft. So this was an in-depth look at SAC, and especially its atomic squadrons. Well, he generates his report and he submits that to General Vandenberg in September of 1948. And there were serious issues. If you could, slide please. In his report, Lindbergh found issues in just about every area: pilot proficiency, maintenance of aircraft, maintenance of equipment. I've got a bit of a quote here. Lindbergh wrote, "I have come to the conclusion that a great and almost immediate improvement in the striking power of our atomic forces can be made through attention to personnel. And then he went on to add, the average pilot's proficiency is unsatisfactory and maintenance of aircraft and equipment is inadequate. Definitely not the picture that Vandenberg was hoping to hear back. A sad state of our strategic forces, honestly. So what caused what Lindbergh described in his report as these existing deficiencies in SAC's atomic program? Kenney was a top-notch commander. Originally, his deputy was Major General St. Clair Street, another top-notch officer, and then later, when Street left to, I believe, go to the Inspector General's office, Major General Clements McMullen replaced him. And again, all these folks, commanders, just top-notch commanders. If you could slide, please. So what was causing the issues in SAC? Well, there were certainly some external issues going on. You look at this slide, and obviously I'm talking about the end of World War II. Just a massive demobilization of equipment and personnel. There was a drawdown of the men and women, as I said. If you look on the screen, 12 million men and women at the end of World War II in the military. And then by 1947, that was reduced to 1.5 million. So you can see, you know, just a huge effort to draw down from the World War II. There are also retention and recruitment issues. Many of the men and women coming back were basically ready to end their military time, go back to civilian life, start a family for many of them. And there were others that were just eager to take advantage of the new program that was being offered, and I'm talking about the GI Bill. And my dad, who served in World War II, was one of those who used the GI Bill after the war. On top of these things, there was an expectation of a peace dividend. Isn't there always when wars are over? So significant fund cuts were coming. So externally, you've got just a massive amount of personnel leaving the military, massive amounts of equipment being turned in, and funding is going away. For at least large amounts of funding are going away. On top of these things, if you saw earlier, I kind of had the words that described Kenney. One of the things on there was that he was a dynamic speaker. Well, Army Air Force leaders at the time used that ability of Kenney as a speaker to make a push for an independent Air Force. So obviously, Kenney acquiesced to those requests, and these often pulled him away from daily operations of SAC, again, leaving his deputies, General Street and later McMullen, in charge. Now, those were kind of the external issues. There were also internal issues. Men complained of insufficient training, overworked crews. Obviously, there's the manpower shortage that I'd mentioned, as retention was difficult. There was an intensive cross-training program that SAC had at the time, where the hope was kind of to lessen the impact of these manpower cuts. They wanted to train every crewman to learn all the jobs in the aircraft. On top of the fact that it didn't work very well, it really hurt morale in the unit at the time. So learning all this and taking all these things into account, General Vandenberg makes the decision that a change is needed at SAC. So he selects Lieutenant General at the time, Curtis Lemay, to be his change agent. If you could change the slide, please. So why Curtis Lemay? Well, like Kenney, he's a successful combat commander in World War II. He's the architect of box formations over Europe for his bombers. He led the bombing campaign against Japan. He organized air operations for the Berlin airlift. And it was actually out of that that he was called to be the new commander of SAC. Perhaps most of all, Lemay was known as the guy who got things done, and he was successful in just about everything he did. But going into this position, obviously there was no silver bullet that was going to fix these things. It was going to take a lot of work. So Lemay focused, as he often did, on training, and lots of it, to determine the extent of SAC's woes when he gets to Strategic Air Command. There are some that said, that things weren't as bad as it sounded. So he goes to prove that immediately by ordering an all-out mock bombing mission on Dayton, Ohio. And by all accounts, some worse than others, this was a massive failure. Numerous aircraft were unable to take off because of maintenance issues. Some never found the target. Those that found the target, for many cases, did not hit the target. So again, it's just a failure in just about every aspect. So Lemay got to work. He eliminated the cross-training program. He instituted crew integrity policy. He gave spot promotions to crews that were excelling. Did I mention training? A lot of it. He knew the more realistic the training, the better the chance for mission success for his crews, and perhaps more importantly, their survival. In 1971, Lemay sat down for an oral history interview that I thought was appropriate to give you a part of. He was asked how he got the most out of his men. And Lemay's answer to that was, and I quote, it's kind of a lengthy quote, my apologies. "I have always believed that you can really work a man until he drops if three factors exist. One, you have to be doing something important, and everybody has to know it is important. Two, you have to be making a little headway towards getting the job done. And three, you have to show a little appreciation once in a while." I love that, once in a while. When these three conditions exist, you can really accomplish miracles, and this is what I always tried to do. So that was Lemay's philosophy. And he had early successes as well. March 1949, a SAC B-50 Super Fortress crew, my apologies, in Lucky Lady 2 circumnavigates the globe, the first non-stop around the world flight, and you can see the route they took there on the screen. Again, this is just another public relations boon for SAC and the fledgling Air Force. Of course, we know below that there were a lot of issues, but to the public, things looked great. Like Kenney as well, Lemay had some long-term issues to deal with, and mainly those had to do with recruitment and retention. SAC was beginning to generate new equipment and sophisticated equipment, and they were going to need to have highly skilled airmen to maintain and operate this equipment. So SAC had to work on its recruitment and its retention to be successful. Next slide, please. So what did SAC and honestly the Air Force have to offer young airmen, or even any airmen and their families? Most Army bases, obviously they're now Air Force bases. They were constructed in World War II. They had the runway, obviously. They had some hangars. They had some open bay barracks. They had little, if any, housing and almost no amenities on the base. Lemay knew that this was going to just be a huge detriment to him gaining and keeping the personnel that he needed. Again, especially as the weapon systems got more and more sophisticated. And you can see the screens there. Not a pretty sight on most Air Force bases at the time. Next slide, please. So Lemay, as he does, jumps right into it. He works hard to secure dormitories for SAC's single airmen. These dormitories were designed by SAC engineers to be modern. Lemay said he was really wanting the dorms to portray that SAC airmen were in an elite status. The average dorm was not going to be enough for SAC airmen. They were going to get nice accommodations, nice living areas. You see that most cases they were two-person rooms. This obviously was undertaken in the early 50s. When I joined the Air Force in 1984, that was still the standard for two people in a room. So just a lasting legacy by Lemay and SAC. Next slide, please. Lemay also pressed the Air Force, the state, and federal officials to fund and build modern and attractive housing for its married airmen and their families. You see this brochure. This is actually from Mountain Home brochure for weary housing. There were two successful campaigns that came out of Strategic Air Command and SAC's efforts. Those were Cape Heart and Weary housing initiatives in the 1950s. And this went broader. It also impacted other commands and the Air Force in general. I hate to keep talking about my days, old days in the military, but when I went to Nellis in 2007, they were just tearing down the Weary housing there on the base and moving families out of it. So again, something that very lasting, some might say lasted too long, but very lasting for Strategic Air Command and the Air Force. Next slide, please. When you think of Curtis Lemay, this picture pretty much says it all. You know, he's got the cigar, he's got the scowl, and obviously it's an accurate portrayal of, well, at least obviously an accurate picture. He had suffered a mild case of Bell's palsy, which often happened to flyers back then. That was in 1942. So there are some that say that the scar was there to kind of aid in hiding the fact that he had had some paralysis, and the scowl was part of that as well. But I don't think anyone would say that Lemay was a happy-go-lucky sort. So I don't think that he was too disappointed in the thought that people thought he was a stern individual. Let me put it that way. But there was another side to Lemay, and that was a commander and a man that cared about his people and their welfare. Next slide, please. A little different side of Lemay in these photos. He didn't stop with just improving the facilities. He wanted to make kind of a sense of family and community on SAC bases. You know, as is often said, if you're going to retain the airmen, you need to retain the family in many cases. So Lemay established what would be called SAC's people programs. And these included judo, and you see him there in his judo garb, other conditioning programs, and also involved other special arts, auto hobby shops, sanctioned races on SAC runways and flight lines, if you can imagine that. This was later canceled by the Air Force out of concern for safety and liability. But hey, Lemay was a car enthusiast, so anything that dealt with cars, he was probably going to give it a shot. Next slide, please. And it goes on. The arts and crafts clubs, there's woodworking, there's gun clubs, there's skeet and trap, base intramurals, libraries, and I could go on and on. But you get the picture. SAC bases were really became a community unto themselves. And next slide, please. So if you look at Lemay's efforts, they obviously, as we know from history, they were successful. Retention rates increased. SAC went on to become an elite fighting force that deterred our enemies for over 45 years. And Lemay succeeded, honestly, where Kenney had failed. And I believe That was in large part to a few things. One, Lemay's personal involvement, his strong training emphasis, his esprit de corps initiatives, the improved facilities, the people programs that increased recruitment and retention. But there is one final key that I think Lemay had that Kenney didn't have at his disposal. And it's interesting and kind of ironic that on this date, 73 years ago, so 23 September 1949, an Air Weather Service RB-29 crew confirmed through air samples that the Soviets had detonated an atomic bomb. The result of that information led to a significant increase in U.S. military spending. The peace dividend that was expected was over, and this was an advantage, honestly, that SAC and Lemay enjoyed for many years. Next slide. If there are any questions, that concludes what I had to say for you today. I will say that many of you likely know that Lemay went on to command SAC for about 9 years. He retired as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force in 1965. And General Kenney commanded Air University until his retirement in 1951.
Don, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Questions? Don, I've got a question. How much was General Lemay and General Kenney interested in, sort of at a deeper level, interested in technology, do you think?
Kenney was always known as an innovator, and I believe, and I'm certainly not an expert on Kenney, but I believe that he would have had a huge interest on innovations and things that were available to him. Lemay, obviously, and Strategic Air Command were always pushing for improved equipment, improved weapon systems, the latest technologies. You look back into the 50s and 60s in SAC, and just the sheer amount of aircraft and then later ICBMs that are coming online show to me that, yeah, certainly they were looking for innovations to improve their commands any way they could.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, well, let's give Dawn a big round of applause. Dawn, appreciate that. Hey, for just a few minutes, I want to show off our latest lib guide, which was just, Bruce, when was it officiated?
This morning.
There he is.
We published it this morning.
This morning, so hot off the presses. So I want to thank the Air University Library team that put together the latest lib guide. And it's a mix of sort of, it's all history, of course, because SAC's been gone since 92, right? But I want to thank some of the front of the house folks, and Jeff helped me out here. So we had Sandy Malady working on this. We had Yvette Pearson, and who else? And of course the esteemed Bruce Cathay.
And Justin review.
And Justin did some review, and then in the back of the house with the historian minded people, Roberta Bertolo did a lot of the uploading and scanning of the photographs. So, and did Lexi help out a little bit?
Lexi scanned.
And Lexi scanned as well. That's right. Yeah, she did the slides. So we're going to show you that guide right here. Yeah, so I know we have a lot of library staff in the audience, so you all know what the LibGuides are about. But for the others, the library puts together these resource guides, and they are, how many resource guides do we have now? Is it over
100?
Over 100, right?
Yeah, it's got to be over.
And we've got everything under the sun, and we're always interested in adding new guides that will help students, faculty, staff, and really the general public understand the resources that the library offer. So if you scroll up just a tiny bit so we can look at the tabs. So look at the tabs at the top of the, yeah, there we go. So each one of the, some are slightly different, but basics on this is it has multiple areas of research focus. So first, we have the home page, gives you the contact information, etc. So Air University Research, this is primarily student papers and faculty research papers. So if you scroll down here, you can see the team has added a bunch of different ones, things about Curtis Lemay and Jimmy Doolittle and about technology and one of the planes, etc. And also you can, if you put in that Strategic Air Command search into the search engine, you'll get even more. So, and then let's go to books and documents. So again, some of the I should mention the student papers are available to the world. So those are not blocked behind a firewall. In regards to many of the books and documents and several of the journals, journal articles, etc., those are only for AU faculty, staff, and students. So just to let you know. So again, and then journals, what do we got there? Okay, we got a lot of these. Now, Air and Space Power Journal and Air Power History, those are wide open, right? Those are open source. And then recent articles over here on your right-hand side. Databases, again, lots of other resources for you to search from. Electronic resources. There we go. Click on one of these here. What is this? Click on the, yeah. This is from the Air Force Historical Support Division. And scroll down, I think you can actually search this. So more information now. All right, back to the home page, please. And if you go to General Lemay, there's a section on him. And this is some of the photographs. And these photos come from, I think, a couple different places. One is the general search on the internet. Two is the Air University Historian's Office. And then we've got the AU Press photo collection as well, right?
And the General Lemay slide collection.
And the General Lemay slide collection, thank you. So scroll through a couple of these photos here. So again, these, you can click on these, you can download these. There's great captions, shows you where they come from, etc. And then we have planes as well. So that, this is a snapshot of the resource guide, and hope anyone that's interested further in SAC can jump on there and learn some more. So, questions? Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and let's give a